All right, time for another Panther-Lair Show, Panther-Lair podcast, Tuesday night live stream, Wednesday podcast, Thursday re-listen, Friday catch-up, whatever it is that you do to tune in to the podcast. We appreciate it. Hope everyone's doing well out there in the world of Pittsburgh or Pittland, wherever it is that you're existing tonight. Sorry, just watching the YouTube live stream here of the podcast, and I see that it's delayed, so I was like watching the preview screen to see how long it takes for the delay to actually like kick in. So I was sitting here talking, introducing the podcast, introducing the live stream, and watching a video of myself just sitting in a chair staring off into space. So but it's funny to do that every now and then. I hope everyone's doing well. Hope everyone's hanging in there, as it were. Certainly plenty of Pitt stuff to talk about. You know, I feel like we were just here a couple days ago doing a reaction live stream, a reaction podcast on Sunday night after Pitt got a bunch of commitments, 3 more commitments on Sunday, plus a graduate transfer commitment on Saturday. And, you know, things humming right along in football recruiting. And it's wild right now how active recruiting has been. I mean, a month ago, 2 months ago, I didn't expect this. I mean, I guess we're taping this on Tuesday night, May 12th. I think it was exactly 2 months ago when the NBA guy announced that he had tested positive for the coronavirus. And I always consider that something of that was the before and after moment for me. I saved a screenshot on my phone when I got the news announcement that the first American had died from the COVID virus. I'm like, well, this is going to be significant. I should keep track of this. Remember the date. I forget what that was. I forget what that date was, but I think it was May 12th when the guy in the NBA announced that he had tested positive, and that was really the before and after moment, because after that you started having conference tournaments get canceled, the NCAA tournament gets canceled, and NBA and NHL, and they're talking about maybe having no fans, and then they end up canceling it altogether or postponing the season indefinitely, and colleges start shutting down. I mean, everything snowballed after that night. So it's been 2 months, and I really thought recruiting was going to slow to a crawl and maybe even to a halt. At best case scenario, I thought maybe recruiting would be at the normal pace that it's at in the spring, but still probably fall off a little bit because kids couldn't go out and take visits and coaches couldn't go out and do in-person evaluations, which we talked about last week. I thought these things would slow the recruiting process down, but by God, it's gone the other way. I mean, across the country, Sunday was a crazy day for commitments, and it wasn't just Pitt getting 3. I mean, it was all over the place. I remember before Sunday, I think it was on Friday or Saturday, I was talking to Josh Helmholt, who covers the Midwest for us in Rivals.com, and we were talking about how Pitt had a couple kids from Detroit who were probably going to commit to the Panthers on Sunday, and we were talking about that, and I was like, you had a busy day planned? You got a lot of commitments? He's like, you have no idea. And he just started running down the list of guys just in the Midwest region who were planning to commit on Sunday, and I think ended up committing on Sunday. They followed through their plans, and that's just in the Midwest. That's not even in the Southeast, which is obviously a very busy region for high school, for football recruiting. Not throughout the the heartland, and throughout Texas, and to the West Coast, and then the Mid-Atlantic. I mean, there was a lot of recruiting action, more than you would expect to see on a random Sunday, and it's not entirely random Sunday. It's Mother's Day, and sometimes recruits like to do things on that day, but it was wild. It was unprecedented, and it was unprecedented because we haven't seen this kind of thing before in the spring and in May, and it was unexpected because I thought all this would slow recruiting down. Instead, Pitt's got 12 commitments by before the middle of May, which is absolutely unheard of. I've been doing this job for 15 years, and I've never seen anything like this. I mean, like, it used to be like Texas would do this. Texas would get a dozen commitments by, middle of spring. And they'd be almost full by this point. So Pitt's not quite at Texas level, Texas circa 2008 levels when Mac Brown had it going there. But that was where you saw all the early commitments happening. You saw it at Texas, or maybe Ohio State would get some, and Alabama, the usual suspects. It's happening all over the country right now, and Pitt is sitting here with 12. I mean, it wasn't that long ago that we were talking about, whatchamacallit. It wasn't that long ago that we were talking about, it was a couple years ago, and Pitt was going into June with no commitments, and people were wondering, is Pitt going to get any commitments this year? They're never going to get any commitments. What's the problem with Pitt recruiting? And do you remember people jumping off the bridge? I think it was 2 years ago. And then they had that Father's Day massacre where they landed like 9 guys in one day. And everybody shut up because we said, look, June is when it's going to pop off. Well, this year it popped off a lot sooner, and they're going to go into June with a dozen or more commitments, which is crazy. I mean, it's wild, and we've never seen anything like this. And it's just funny how, having an emergency rule change that should have slowed down the recruiting process has actually gone the other way, and it's sped it up. So we talked a lot about Pitt's commitments on Sunday night when we did that reaction podcast. We'll touch on them quickly here. They got 3 on Sunday. They started with Preston Levant, the linebacker from Georgia, and then they got 2 offensive linemen out of Detroit, Terrence Enos and Brandon Honorable. 2 big guys, good size, Honorable, a tackle prospect, and Enos, a guy who can play tackle or guard at his size. I think he's got the versatility to move inside or outside. And then Levant, the linebacker, a guy who's got pretty good range, pretty good athleticism, and probably will play middle linebacker. So his range and athleticism will look even better lining up in the middle of the defense there. And so we're at an interesting point with Pitt's recruiting class right now where they've got 12 commitments, and when you break them down, they've got 8 on offense and 4 on defense. And it's kind of funny to see that, because if you've followed Pitt recruiting for the last 5 years, and you've followed the trends with Pat Narduzzi and his staff and their recruiting, the strength is always on defense. And I think it'd be interesting, and I'll probably do this and write about it in the 321 column and maybe talk about it on the Panthers Insider Show on Saturday. I would bet that every recruiting class, if you look back, 16, 17, 18, 19, and 20, more often than not, you're going to find an imbalance of numbers favoring the defense. They've just recruited defense better, and they've recruited defense to some extent more than offense. That's just how they've approached it. And part of it has been what they inherited and what they needed to fill in on the roster when they arrived. But that's just been the trend. Well, here we sit probably halfway through the recruiting class for the 2021 class, and the imbalance is the other way. The imbalance is on offense with 8 out of their 12 commitments on that side of the ball and only 4 on defense. And those 8, of course, they have 4 offensive linemen. They have 1 quarterback, 1 running back, and 2 wide receivers to make up those 8 kids. And then so you start getting to a point where you're asking, what's left? What else do they need on offense? I mean, obviously tight end is a big spot that needs to be filled. And I really think they'll probably try and take 2. They should try to take 2. If they don't get 2, it's going to be another miss. I mean, at this point with Pitt and their tight end recruiting, just get 1 as a start. Obviously they got Kai Wright in the 2019 class. And Jason Collier, although he pretty quickly moved to the offensive line after getting recruited. But we've talked about this. We've run down the tight end list. I mean, there was nobody in the 2018 class. The 2017 class had 3 tight ends in it. 2 of them are gone from the roster, and the other one recently moved to offensive tackle. 2016 class, they didn't have any tight ends. And the 2015 class, they didn't have any tight ends. Yeah, I mean, I went through this whole thing where it's 6 years of tight end recruiting from like 14 through 19. The 14 through 19 classes, 6 years of tight end recruiting, have produced 3 career receptions. And those were all Tyler Sear, and he's at Temple now. So, we could go down into the infinite abyss of Pitt's tight end recruiting over the last 5 years, but they got to get guys this year. I mean, they need to. They need to stop having to go into the transfer portal to find tight ends. They need to not have to look at junior college players anymore to try and find tight ends. They need to be able to get some guys in and develop them, and I think they're in on some interesting prospects. Actually, like I say, we're taping this on Tuesday night, just before, like literally minutes before this live stream and this podcast started recording. I was on the phone with a tight end prospect that Pitt's targeting, and got to say, is one of the more interesting stories I've heard in recruiting. One of the more interesting guys I've talked to. His history, his backstory is pretty interesting of where he came from football-wise and where he's going. So look for that on Panther-Lair.com on Wednesday. But they got to get tight ends in this class. They have to get at least one, and ideally they would get two to really start restocking the depth there and build something that can be consistent out of the tight end position at Pitt. So, you've got 8 already offensive commitments. I think you need 2 tight ends. That would put you at 10. And then, you start to get into a question of how much more do they take? They've already got 4 offensive linemen. They've already got a running back. They've already got 2 wide receivers. They're obviously not going to take 2 quarterbacks in this class, but do they need more at any of those other positions? Offensive line, running back, wide receiver. And I'm kind of the mind that I think they're going to try and get one more at all of those positions. I think they're going to try and get out there and get 5 O-linemen in this class. I think they're going to try and get out there and get 2 running backs in this class, and I think they're going to try and get 3 wide receivers in this class. And I think they're going to do that and pursue those numbers for a variety of reasons. Along the offensive line, they simply need numbers. And we've talked about this a bunch. The last 3 recruiting classes, Pitt signed 2 offensive linemen in each of the 3 classes. Now, they ultimately moved some guys from different positions to offensive line, and that helped bolster the numbers a bit, but they just need offensive linemen. They need to have a big class of guys, and 2021 is shaping up to be that class with potentially 5 recruits. And then I think do they need another running back? It's a tough call. They got Izzy Abanaconda in this 2020 class. They got 2 guys in the 2019 class, Vincent Davis and Daniel Carter, but Carter has since moved to fullback, but you still got Vincent Davis. He's only in his 2nd year. A.J. Davis and Todd Sibley will be 4th-year players this year. Davis will be a senior. Sibley will be a redshirt junior. Davis is obviously done. Sibley as a redshirt junior, after this season, could stick around, could leave, who knows. But I could make a case for taking 2 running backs, especially if you get 2 guys with sort of distinct styles. I mean, they've got Rodney Hammond, who is almost a guy who could play slot receiver or be a slot back or something. I could see them trying to add a big back to go with Hammond in this class and really kind of bolster the weapons they have on this team. I think you could really try to make this I think you could really paint this recruiting class as being one that aims to restock the weapons on this roster, maybe more than some of the recent classes we've seen. If they go out and take 2 running backs, 3 wide receivers, and 2 tight ends, you've restocked the weapons pretty significantly. I mean, that's 7 guys out of a class of potentially 23, 24. You're looking at close to 30% of your class, just in offensive skill players or big skill, if you want to call tight ends that. But I think this roster needs it. I think they could use 2 good running backs. I think the wide receiver room has been a process for Chris Beatty since he arrived. It's been, he's sort of been given the directive to rebuild that room, rebuild the talent in the room, and stock it up. He obviously, did well last year with Jordan Addison and Jalen Barden and Aiden Henningham. Those are 3 really good receiver prospects. At least 2, if not all 3 of those guys will see the field this year, I believe. But that's one class, and it's one class with 3 guys. You need to keep building. You need to keep adding to it with talent. And, so far they've got Jaden Bradley, who's a big wide receiver, more size than what they've currently got on the roster. Former quarterback, so a guy who knows the game, but also has good athleticism. And again, size at like a legit 6'4". And then they got Miles Olsen, who's maybe the smaller guy who, could line up inside or outside, but, maybe more cut from the same cloth as Jalen Barden and Jordan Addison. So you got a little bit of, you're bringing in more talent there, and I could see them, if they get the right opportunity, they get the right guy, I could see them taking a 3rd wide receiver. So this class is really setting itself up to be one where Pitt restocks at some key positions on offense. Well, and not even restocks. It's almost a reloading. You get the impression of a reload at running back and wide receiver, and obviously tight end, which they need. Offensive line is a matter of restocking, where you need to pile numbers in there, because you're playing with fire when you only sign 2 offensive linemen in a class, because you need both of those guys to hit. You sign 4 guys, you sign 5 guys. Now you've given yourself a little bit of a cushion that if not everybody pans out, if a couple guys don't necessarily become starters, it's okay because you took a bunch of them. And so you should still get meaningful production and meaningful reps and snaps out of the guys who you brought in. So 8 offensive commitments so far. I think you could see them go as far as taking like 5 more offensive recruits, which would be wild. 13 offensive commitments in the class. Again, I'm going to have to do some research on these numbers and see how it backs up over the last 5 years, to see if they've even come close to that kind of split. Because even if this class goes giant, and I'm talking like 24, 25 recruits in the class, if they take 13 offensive players, you can do the math. You don't need to get the calculator out. That's more than half the class is going to be on offense. Can't think that's happened too many times under Pat Narduzzi. But it's what the roster needs. Now, we talk about what the roster needs, and obviously they need improved play out of the offensive line in 2020. These guys are not going to help with that problem. They're not going to help with that problem in 2021, and they're probably not going to help with that problem in 2022. You want to be at a point where you're recruiting to replace the guys who are going to be gone 4 years from now or 3 years from now. Not where you're thinking, boy, our offensive line is real thin right now. We better get a bunch of guys, because that's where they're at. I think they've got limited numbers. And that 2017 class, it was a really big class. You probably have to go back to that class to find the last one that was this big in terms of offense, where they had 4 or 5 offensive linemen and 3 tight ends in that class. That class that was really big, those guys are all going to be redshirt juniors this year. So they've got 1 year left after 2020. Now, you want to get to a point where you are recruiting the current O-line class to replace 3 years down the road, 4 years down the road, not where you're recruiting with big numbers because you're looking at it and saying, oh, man, our depth is shot, and we're really thin at these offensive line positions. You get a little thin at wide receiver, you can recruit to replace those guys immediately. You get a little thin at running back, you can recruit guys who can come in and play right now. Even tight end to some extent, although I think it's a little more difficult than it is at receiver or running back. O-line, you want to have to wait on those. You want to wait on those guys. You want to have the depth that keeps those incoming freshmen on the bench until they're in their 3rd years. And I know the recruits don't want to hear that. Nobody wants to go to college and sit, but it's the best thing. And those best situations usually tend to come when O-linemen sit and they wait and they work their way into a position. Because even if they get out there early, a lot of times they're not ready to go. And people talk about a Dorian Johnson or Adam Bisnavati. Dorian Johnson's making starts as a true freshman. I mean, go back and watch his first start as a true freshman. He played down at Georgia Tech in 2013. Jeremiah Atauchu, a lesser man might have wanted to quit football after what Jeremiah Atauchu did to Dorian Johnson in that Georgia Tech game. Because Aaron Donald was dominant in that game. Atauchu wasn't far behind. He killed Tom Savage that day. And Adam Bisnavati wasn't a whole lot better when he was a redshirt freshman playing out there. You want these guys to wait. And you want to recruit that you have enough depth that they can wait. That you're not throwing them out on the field right away. Ideally for Pitt, this year's class, which could top out to 5 offensive linemen or something like that, ideally this will be the class that helps reestablish the depth. And, you also need some pretty good hit rates on those classes of 2018 and 2019 and 2020. That all remains to be seen. All right, let's hit the live stream questions. A lot of people in the comments, and we appreciate that, as always, everybody who's chiming in. Let me get something out here, what we've got this evening, because I haven't talked about it yet. This is from our friends at Voodoo Brewery. Let me bring this up so you can see it. Unrefined. It's a New England double IPA, unfiltered. I don't know what that means. I mean, I guess they didn't filter it, right? That's what that means. 8.1%. So it's a little bit stronger. We'll be telling lies and, making jokes by the end of the podcast after the 8.1. But unrefined, it's a tasty drink, I got to say. And, our friends at Voodoo were kind enough to support the podcast. They're big Pitt fans. If you're in Meadville, even if you're not, you're in the Giant Eagle or someplace, go find some Voodoo. It's really good. They've got a lot of good stuff. Of course, they have the non-trademark infringement Alma Mater IPA. You in the distinctive colors, you'll recognize the can. That's a good one. And this unrefined is really good. If you can find, I don't know if I find this at Giant Eagle or not at the market districts that sell 6-packs, but I recommend it if you can find it. All right, let's jump into some of the questions and comments here. This is always the fun. I hope there's nothing wrong with the stream. It looks like we were buffering there for a little bit, so I apologize if there are some issues with the stream on the apologize if there's some issues with the stream on YouTube because it looks like we're having some problems there, but we'll keep it rolling here. Let's see. Questions here. Eric Rogers, what is the reason we can never get a legacy recruit? And why do you think Dinkins has no interest in Pitt? Now, Dinkins, he's talking about Khalil Dinkins from North Allegheny, son of Darnell Dinkins, played at Pitt. I don't know if Dinkins has no interest in Pitt. I think he's got interest in Pitt, but it's it doesn't seem to be as strong as you would like it to be out of a local guy who has local ties, who has Pitt ties, a legacy, as Eric called him. The son of a former Pitt player. You'd like to see him seem to be a little bit more interested, and it doesn't seem to be there right now. And I can't tell you a specific reason other than just kids want to find their own thing, and I don't know if there's that sense of connection, and that applies to the legacy recruits overall. It just doesn't seem to be. They don't connect with Pitt the way legacy recruits do at other schools for whatever reason, and I can't really explain it. But it's not a new phenomenon. It's been going on. It doesn't really have anything to do with Pat Narduzzi. It's not Paul Christ or Todd Graham or Dave Wanstead, because it happened to all of them. All those guys lost legacy recruits they were trying to land. Maybe not Todd Graham. Maybe there wasn't anybody in that 2012 class that he was trying to build before he bailed. But I'm pretty sure Paul Christ, certainly Pat Narduzzi, Dave Wanstead, they've all lost legacy recruits, and I can't explain it. I mean, you remember the class of 2009 when Miles Diefenbach went to Penn State. The kid's dad was the women's tennis coach at Pitt. And that wasn't even the worst part of it. If you don't remember, if you weren't around at this time, like if you weren't following Pitt recruiting closely, or you weren't on Panther-Lair.com, you might not have this frame of reference. But there was Miles Diefenbach, an offensive lineman from Fox Chapel. His dad was the women's tennis coach at Pitt. And I don't know if his dad went to Pitt or not, but obviously he's around a lot. And he ends up going to Penn State. And his dad being the women's tennis coach was obviously, that ruffled some feathers. The fact that his dad was the women's tennis coach there, and that his son goes away. But the reality is Miles Diefenbach was huge on Pitt, super high on Pitt throughout his recruitment. He would say we and talk about, he was at Pitt all the time. And then it was all headed toward Pitt. He was going to Pitt. Everybody knew it. He knew it. He would even kind of acknowledge it. And then he just happened to take a visit to Penn State. Just one visit. And I think it was a situation, and this applies to all recruits. It doesn't necessarily have to do with legacies, but Eric asked a question, and it's a good kind of gateway to this topic, which I've talked about before, and certainly on the podcast I've talked about it. He takes a visit to Penn State and sees what a different kind of campus looks like. And you know it as well as I do, there are different types of college campuses, and Pitt is a very distinct, unique type of college campus. It's in a city. It is a city. The campus is a city. Penn State is not in a city. Penn State is its own entity. It's separate. And I remember I've told this story before too. When I was looking at colleges coming out of high school, I remember I visited Elizabethtown. Nice, perfectly nice little school, liberal arts or whatever it was, private school. And I remember visiting it, and it was its own separate thing. Like it wasn't part of the community really. Like I feel like you went through a gate to get onto Elizabethtown's campus, and I'm like, well, this is very nice. It's beautiful. It's close to Hershey. Everything smells like chocolate. It's great. And then I took a visit out to Pitt, and this is not an advertisement for Pitt or an endorsement of Pitt. This is just my own, my own experience. I went on Pitt's campus and I was like, this is a city. I want to be in a city. My point is that these things all hit different people differently, whether they're football recruits or regular students. You as an adult could walk onto Pitt's campus, and you could walk onto, pick another one, Millersville's campus or Penn State's campus, and you're going to have a different reaction to the different types of campuses. And for this kid, for Miles Diefenbach, who had been around Pitt his whole life, who was sure he was going to go to Pitt as soon as he started getting recruited as a football player, all he knew was what Pitt's campus was like, and then he happened to take a visit to Penn State, and he was like, oh, kind of like this better. And that was it. And so, that doesn't answer the question of why Pitt struggles to land legacy recruits, other than just kind of addressing the idea that maybe there's not a standard answer for that, Eric. You know what I mean? Maybe there's not just this one automatic answer that, well, this is why Pitt doesn't land legacy recruits. Well, maybe it really just comes down to the fact that recruits all make decisions for their own reasons. And recruits each have their own rationale when it comes to picking a college, whether they're a legacy recruit or they're, some guy with no connection to Pitt whatsoever. They all have their own reasons. Chris Nguyen says, appreciate your podcast, your interactions on the website and on these streams. Any additional thoughts on Malik Newton, George Rooks, and or Tim Salem's paradoxical recruiting? Chris is ripping these questions from the headlines, or from the message board, rather. Malik Newton, a big-time running back out of Virginia. George Rooks, a big-time defensive end out of New Jersey. We reported on both of those guys on Tuesday here. And Chris, you're obviously on the website, so I'll just say that, look, all the info we know is on the site. So I'm gonna just say that's going to be a plug for Panther-Lair.com. You want the recruiting info on, some big time prospects that Pitt's in on, you go to Panther-Lair.com. As a little plug, we do this podcast for free, but sometimes this stuff has to stay behind the paywall. You know what I mean? So go check it out though, because I think you'll find it pretty interesting. Josh Newark says, I would assume with 24 to 25 scholarships available, Pitt needs to add a second quarterback recruit in case the Texas kid looks elsewhere. That's an interesting idea, Josh. It's a really interesting idea. I don't think Pitt's going to try and get a second quarterback in this class. I don't think they need a second quarterback in this class. I think adding Joey Yellen really gave them insurance and coverage to go from Pickett to Patty to Bevel to Yellen in terms of class to class to class. Not necessarily that's going to be the order of starters at Pitt over the years, but to go from class to class to class to class, I think Yellen gave them that insurance, like I say, and gave them a cushion that they don't need to take a second quarterback. Now, I understand being concerned about landing or concerned about losing Nate Yarnell, Pitt's quarterback recruit out of Texas. And, we talked about his situation where he could really blow up as a senior and, potentially draw more interest, and maybe you worry about fighting to hold on to him throughout his senior season. I don't think you take a second quarterback commitment now as insurance against that. I understand the logic. I think you just, run the risk of pushing Yarnell out or making it easier for him to leave. You divert your attention from all the focus it needs to be on him. And also, we're talking about all these offensive recruits they're trying to get. I mean, I think Pitt could use 2 tight ends more than they could use a second quarterback as insurance in case the first quarterback they got, they end up losing. I think Pitt could use another running back more than they could use that insurance quarterback. Just because I don't think the likelihood is high of it really working out that way. I think if they lose Nate Yarnell, they can find another quarterback. If you think about the guy who is willing to join the class as a second quarterback at Pitt, if he's willing to do that now, if there's a guy in May or June who's willing to be Pitt's second quarterback in the 2021 class, I have a feeling you can find him in November as well. I think you can still get him. Either poach him from another school or get him to commit if he's uncommitted. So I don't see a need to do that right now. It's an interesting idea, Josh, and I hadn't really thought of it that way, but I don't see that happening right now. Nicholas Temperio says, do you expect more decommits than usual if things become somewhat normal and visits start happening? Nicholas, so decommitments have definitely been on the rise in the last couple of years, largely due to a big run of more early commitments. So June has always been a big recruiting month. Schools have always gotten a lot of commitments in June. Pitt has always done really well in June, but the last 2 years have been like June on steroids. You know what I mean? The last 2 years have been outrageous, absurd in terms of the number of commitments that Pitt has gotten. And it's no surprise then that those early commitments have led to maybe a rise in decommitments. And if you think about how the recruiting process works, right? So Pitt got a lot of these commitments from guys who took official visits in June. I think probably every decommitment that has happened in the last 2 years has happened from a guy who took an official visit in June and then committed on or around his official visit. And then what happens is you get into the season, and you get into late in the season, you get into November and December, and those kids are still getting recruited by other schools, and they might go take an official visit to another school. And then the official visit is an experience that's designed to make you feel good. You always joke that you never see anybody have a quote about a bad official visit. It's just kind of you're not supposed to have a bad time. You're supposed to come out of it feeling like that was awesome. I want to spend more time at that place. That's what these official visits are designed to do. That's how these coaches put these things together. So you have a kid like, take Kadri Jackson from a couple years ago, linebacker out of Orlando, right? Takes an official visit to Pitt in June, commits to Pitt, cancels the other June official visit he had scheduled, and then everything's good. Everything's fine. You roll through the fall, and Mac Brown gets hired, and North Carolina starts recruiting him real hard, and they're pushing for him and pushing and pushing and pushing. They get him on campus for an official visit, and then that's it. And he commits, and he ends up signing with North Carolina. He decommits from Pitt within a week before signing day and ends up signing with North Carolina. Now, in the past, say you got a commitment from a kid in June, right? Then it didn't have an official visit that sort of spurred the commitment. He just committed in June because, kids want to commit in June. And you get through the fall and other schools are trying to recruit them. Maybe they even get an official visit out of him. But at some point in there, before signing day, you also are going to get an official visit. You're going to get to give him the Pitt experience if you're Pat Narduzzi or you're Paul Christ or whoever you are. So you've got kind of a fighting chance because this other school is going to throw their best punch at him with the official visit about how amazing it is there. And he's probably going to get impressed by it, and he's going to have some second thoughts about Pitt, but you've got a chance to bring him to campus and make your best case and impress him and all that stuff. You've got a chance to fight back. Well, now, if you get a commitment from a kid in June on his official visit, you're not going to have another official visit to use, especially if it's a kid like I said, Kadri Jackson from Florida or Brandon Mack, the defensive end from Alabama a year or two ago. I think actually the same class as Jackson. You're not going to have, or last year, Henry Parrish, the running back from Miami. These kids from Florida who, or any distance, who probably aren't going to, pony up to come just drive to Pittsburgh or fly to Pittsburgh on their own dime in December, just so you can try to woo them again. So it's a difficult situation that way. Now, what's interesting about this, and Nicholas, I hadn't thought about this until your question. What's interesting this year is kids can't take visits right now. And we're going to find out real soon if they're going to be able to take official visits in June. If they can't take official visits in June, the whole world is upside down. But this might actually work out for the better. Kids can't take visits right now. They can't take official visits due to the NCAA emergency dead period. What might be interesting is, so Pitt's got all these commitments, right? And other schools are going to keep recruiting them. Other schools are going to come hard at these guys. And it's already happening, and it continues to happen, and it's going to continue to happen. But what's going to be interesting is if they can't take official visits this spring or this summer, and they can't go anywhere until the fall, well, they're going to have all their official visits left, and they potentially could go visit North Carolina or Ole Miss or, wherever, Michigan State or, Rutgers, Maryland, whatever it is, right? But Pitt is also going to have an official visit left to use. Pitt is also going to be able to bring these kids in on an official visit and kind of make their case too. When, a kid comes back from a Maryland visit or a Carolina visit or an Ole Miss visit and he says, Coach Narduzzi or Coach Partridge or Coach Beatty, man, that was really awesome. I had a great time. I want to be honest with you. I'm really thinking hard about them. Those guys can say, okay, appreciate your honesty. Can't wait to see you on campus this weekend. And then you can make your case. You can have the final word. You can show him that Pitt is where he really wanted to be. I'm not going to say this will lead to less decommitments, but if they don't have official visits in the summer, I actually think Pitt might have a better chance at holding on to some of these guys. But who knows? To be honest, Nicholas, I hadn't thought about that implication yet, in depth too much. So it really that was off the top of my head. But that's a good question, though. I appreciate it. It's a good question. Dale Gribble says we need another J.P. Holtz. We were talking about the tight ends earlier, and Dale says we need another J.P. Holtz. Yeah, Pitt was kind of spoiled for a couple years. 2012, 2013, 14, 15, 16. It's a solid 5-year run where you had J.P. Holtz in 12, 13, 14, and 15. You had Scott Orndorff in 13, 14, 15, and 16. And those guys were both really good tight ends. Better, more productive tight ends than they've had in the 3 years or 2 years since then. 3 years since then of 17, 18, 19. Pitt fans were spoiled by that. And, they would like to get back to it. Noah Frederick says, thoughts on how the WPIAL kids feel about Pitt. Guys like Elliott Donald, Dorian Ford, Stephon Hall, Khalil Dinkins. It varies guy to guy. You know what I mean? Different players, different recruits have different feelings about the local school. Some are sold on it, some not so much. Some think it's a good place and a good opportunity, but they want to see what other opportunities and what other options are out there. And you can't fault them. You have these 5 official visits to take. Why not go out and, explore? So when you talk about the guys that you mentioned, Noah, you talk about Elliott Donald, you talk about Dorian Ford from Baldwin, Stephon Hall from Central Valley, or Khalil Dinkins from North Allegheny, who we talked about earlier. I think they're in good shape with Elliott Donald from Central Catholic, Aaron Donald's nephew, but more than that, I think he's just got strong connections with the Pitt staff. Dorian Ford from Baldwin, maybe not as much. I don't have as strong of a feeling on him. Stephon Hall from Central Valley, a safety. I think they've got a good shot with him, but it could be interesting to see if they project him as a corner or a safety because I think there's probably a chance that the other safety spot in this class fills up sometime soon. So I think they want a couple safeties and a couple corners in this recruiting class, but those spots could start coming off the board, and that leaves you out on the outside looking in. John Polton says, I really appreciate this. Hard to find news and views on Pitt down here in Virginia. Hey, man, I'm glad you could tune in. I always say this is like a little opportunity for us to talk Pitt sports, John. You know what I mean? And so wherever you are, you can get on the live stream and post your comments and questions, and we can talk about it. Grant Delosier asked me about the Voodoo Lacto Cooler. I have not had the Lacto Cooler, Grant, so we'll have to check that out. It's interesting, but a good beer. I don't know about the ones that are lacto, the lactose beers, but I've had some that I enjoy. Pit Parade asks, is Khalil Dinkins any good? Yeah, he's a pretty good player. I think he's a big athletic tight end. He could be a big receiver, really. I mean, I think he's got that kind of tweener athleticism where he's probably athletic enough to play receiver, but he's also probably big enough to be a tight end. And look, I mean, there are enough examples in college sports and college football and the NFL of guys that blur the lines between tight end and wide receiver. And I think, I don't know if Dinkins is entirely that, but I think he's a really good player who, for a team that needs to add tight ends, as we've been talking about, Dinkins can, is a priority for the staff. I just don't know if they're going to get him. Nicholas Temperio again points out that Tom Ricketts' son, was in the same class as Miles Diefenbach. Yeah, it was a bad stretch. I mean, if you want to go down memory lane here for a second to about 12 years ago. Pitt's, fresh off the Sun Bowl, where they, lose 3-0 to Oregon State. LaShawn McCoy's gone to the NFL. Scott McKillop's gone. Bill Stahl is returning, much to the chagrin of Pitt fans who despised his performance in the Sun Bowl and some of those late season games. And you get into the offseason and just nothing seems to be going well. And they've got these two guys that are local that have real connections to Pitt, and Miles Diefenbach and Tom Ricketts. And they both go to Penn State. They both committed to Penn State that offseason. Now, does anybody remember the antidote to the negativity that came up in June or so that year? After Ricketts and Diefenbach had everybody feeling really down, do you remember what happened? Who committed? TJ Clemmings. Do you remember TJ Clemmings committing? 4-star kid out of New Jersey. Big time ad for Pitt. Big time land for Pitt. Pitt needed good news. They needed good publicity, and they got it when TJ Clemmings committed. But then, of course, he kind of sat on that commitment for a long time and didn't talk publicly about it, and there were a lot of questions. But that was an interesting situation. Royce Beacom asks, Dave Wanstead was the legacy coach, but we refused to keep him. Did this send a message? I think you have to work very hard to maintain legacy connections, especially at Pitt. Am I going to connect Dave Wanstead's firing to Pitt's struggles in landing a legacy recruit? No, because Dave Wanstead didn't land all the legacy recruits. I forget if he offered Greg Meisner's kid or not, but those two guys we just talked about, Ricketts and Diefenbach, he didn't land them. And that was in the heyday of Wani. He was coming off a 9-win season, and he couldn't get those two guys. So again, I don't know. I don't think there's one common reason that Pitt struggles with legacy recruits. I think it's just every recruit has their own reason for deciding, and I think there just isn't always a strong connection between legacies and alums and Pitt. And look, you can draw that line through to the general public too, to Gen Pop of Pitt fans. You look at the attendance. You can't look at Heinz Field on a Saturday and tell me that everybody who went to Pitt feels some strong affinity for the football program and some strong connection to their alma mater. Because if they did, more of them would be at the games, And I think that carries over to guys who played there. And their kids are making decisions for their own reasons. Mark Cerny asks, do you believe there's any chance of Jeff Capel grabbing another recruit for the 2020 recruiting class? Yeah, I think it's possible. He's got one scholarship spot left. My guess is that he won't get anyone, a high school kid. I think he'll continue to look at the transfer market and see if anybody pops out over the summer and comes available. But if you told me that I could either bet on Jeff Capel keeping that scholarship empty and playing with 12 scholarship players this season, or the field, with the field being he gets another high school kid, he gets a transfer or a grad transfer, he somehow fills that other scholarship spot. Well, I was going to say I would take, Jeff Capel goes into the season with one extra spot. I think probably one possibility is that you could have like a walk-on get a scholarship. So I don't want to say that it's guaranteed that they'll play with 12 scholarship players, but I think that's a real possibility. And Dale, Josh Newark has a comment I want to get to because this is actually something I really wanted to talk about. But Dale Gribble's last comment here, firing Dave Wanstead put Pitt back at least 10 years. I don't know about that. I don't know if it put him back 10 whole years. I don't think it was the firing Dave Wanstead. It was everything that happened after that was the problem. I've often said I can't blame Pitt for feeling like they hit a ceiling at the end of the 2010 season, that, taking the entirety of the previous 6 years together, even taking the 3 years prior together of 2008, 2009, 2010, when they won 27 games, I can't fault someone who looked at those 3 years or those 6 years and said, this program has hit a ceiling and it's not going to get any higher than it already has. Because if it didn't over the last 3 years, it's not going to do it. And I said that at the time. I've said that since then. There's been a lot of revisionist views on that. There are a lot of people who will walk around and tell you how terrible it was to fire Dave Wanstead, and they were the same people who, after the Connecticut game in 2010, after the Cincinnati game in 2009, after the Sun Bowl in 2008, after the, take your pick, Navy game in 2007, there were a lot of options that year, after each of the final 5 games in 2006, and after like 6 games in 2005, hell, after the Notre Dame game, the season opener in 2005, those same people who are now telling you they never should have fired Dave Wanstead were telling you how they needed to fire Dave Wanstead. So we look back and we get nostalgic and at times poetic about those last 3 years of the Dave Wanstead era. But he lost the Bowling Green in those last 3 years. He had the Sun Bowl game in those last 3 years. He lost to Cincinnati, the 45-44 game in those last 3 years. He had 2 nationally televised home blowouts in his final season, in addition to losing to Connecticut because he couldn't make a stop on 4th and 1. I mean, it wasn't the firing that was the problem. It was everything that happened after that. The decision, I think, was justifiable. I could see where you're coming from to make that decision to fire. It was just handled so poorly afterward. Josh Newark had a comment here that this was one of the topics I wanted to talk about on the show tonight. He says, correct me if I'm wrong, but I swear I saw a tweet today about a recommendation from some subcommittee to extend the dead period through July 31st. As far as I know, Josh, here's the latest that I know, and I haven't. I'll check after the podcast to see after we tape this to see if something new has come out. But I believe the NCAA or one of their subcommittees, like you said, one of their boards or whatever it is expected to meet on Wednesday, May 13th, and decide whether to extend it through June 30th. And that's a huge date and a huge decision. Right now, the dead period is slated to go through May 31st. And if they decide to extend it till the end of June, then you're losing all those official visits. And the NCAA, if they extend it to the end of June and it actually ends at the end of June, they may decide to have visits in July or something like that. Although I'm not sure if the coaches would go for that. I think you might not have official visits until the fall, which would really make things jumbled. I think they would probably have to scrap the December signing day, but I mean, we're going a lot of steps down the road here. But this is a major decision to watch. If this, is still what's actually happening, it's a major decision to watch on Wednesday if they're going to extend the dead period. Because if they do extend the dead period, then there are no visits happening this spring. If they decide that the dead period is going to end on May 31st, as they previously planned, their first plan that they put in place, then we're going to see official visits in June, and June's going to get crazy again. And we may see some of the guys who committed to Pitt already end up taking official visits in June, and the world gets wild again, and things get nuts. So watch for that decision. Watch for that news coming out on Wednesday, what the NCAA decides. And hopefully, if you listen to this podcast after the fact, after the NCAA has already decided, then the answer ahead of time. But that's a big date to circle on the calendar. It's a big decision to watch from the NCAA. Other news on Tuesday, 23 California state universities are going online only for the fall. That includes Fresno State, San Diego State, and San Jose State out of the Mountain West. This is significant. This is significant for a lot of reasons, I think, because you've seen a lot of schools and chancellors and athletic directors and trustees and all these people, coaches and everybody in the last few weeks talking about how they're planning to have a regular school year, how they're planning to do this. They're planning to have everybody on campus. They're planning to conduct business as usual this fall. And they're planning, and they intend. But all of that is just hope. They're just hoping they can have classes in the fall. They have to plan for it. It's far too big of an endeavor to just say, well, we don't know. We'll figure it out in mid-August. You have to plan and go forward as if you are going to do it. But the reality is you don't know if you're actually going to do it. You have to plan and be prepared that if you get to mid-August and everything's a go, you can jump right in and start school when you plan to start school, knowing full well that you may get to mid-August and have to call the whole thing off. Now, I've contended that if you don't have students on campus, if the general student body is not on campus, if you're doing online classes for your university as a whole, I don't see how you can have student athletes or compel student athletes to be on campus. And I don't see how you can make them practice, and I don't see how you can make them have games. To me, I think it's really hard to conceive of college football without college. And if schools cancel their classes or move to remote learning and online classes, as these 23 California state universities have done, as these 3 schools in the Mountain West have done, man, I guess it's not impossible, right? I guess you could figure out a way to do it, but how can you say it's not safe to have 12 kids together in a classroom, but we're going to have all the football players on campus? And I know it's not just 12 players in a classroom. It's 12 students in a classroom. I know it's thousands of people, occupying a pretty small area and close quarters. I just don't know how you could have college online, remote, not having students on campus, but say, yeah, the football players have to come and we're going to play football. Seeing that news out of California, it's troubling. It's concerning because, look, we're all looking forward to the fall. I think about it every day. I think about what the fall is going to look like. I think about what it could be if there is no football, and it's frightening, but it's a real possibility we all have to consider and deal with, right? I mean, we all have to imagine it as a real possibility. All right, let's see. A couple other things to get to here. I keep seeing buffering issues. I apologize if you guys are on the live stream, if this is not coming through well, or hopefully the audio is recording all right to make the podcast. But let me see here. Ryan Smith asks, how does Pitt stand with, I think you mean Naquan Rogers and Anai White and Mekhi Flowers? A couple of, 3 4-star recruits that you're asking about there, Ryan, and I'm not entirely sure where Pitt stands with them. They've got a lot of irons in the fire right now with this recruiting class. There are a lot of big time prospects they're after, and there are a lot of big time prospects that are giving them a really strong look. I couldn't tell you about the 3 you asked about specifically, but we're keeping an eye on it, and that would be probably one of the downsides of not having visits in June. I think there are some ways it could benefit Pitt with 12 commitments already, and potentially, who knows, 13, 14, 15 by the end of the month. There are ways I could see it could benefit Pitt to not have visits in June, but it also, some of the guys you're talking about, some of these big times, kind of like in the past couple years, a good chance to get them on campus is official visits, where you can buy their plane ticket and you can put them up in a hotel, and you can take care of them, and you can do everything for them and give them a great experience, and you're going to increase your chances of landing those guys, obviously, if you do that, if you're able to do that. And I think probably Pitt's chances with some of the big time kids that are in on and that they're going after, it's tougher without those official visits. So I'm not sure. I don't know what's happening with those kids in particular, but it's it would help Pitt to have official visits for those guys. Well, I'm not sure if this stream is having issues or not. No one has really commented it, but I keep getting messages and error messages. So I think we covered all the ground I wanted to cover. I wanted to talk about that May 13th date. I wanted to talk about the offensive recruiting in this class and the O-linemen and the skill players and all that kind of stuff. And I think we covered that. So I hope you're able to follow along and check it out. Of course, all this info and all this insight and opinion and all those things are on Panther-Lair.com every day. Panther-Lair.com, Pittsburgh.rivals.com. It's the most comprehensive source of Pitt sports news on the internet, football, basketball, recruiting. You find it all on Panther-Lair.com. We've had some great content this week, I think, on the football recruiting side. We've had some great content on the basketball recruiting side, some great content on the basketball analysis side, football analysis. There's everything going on right now on Panther-Lair.com. If you're a Pitt fan, you need to go to Panther-Lair.com, Pittsburgh.rivals.com. Panther-Lair.com. We do this every week, Tuesday nights at 8:30 with the live stream, and then Wednesday we release the podcast of it. So we appreciate everybody who checks in on the live stream. We appreciate everybody who tunes in to the podcast. We're hoping, we've been on for a couple of weeks here on this, we're hoping to have another Conversations podcast this Friday. Trying to line up a guest. Got some guys I really want to talk to. It just hasn't come together. So hoping to talk to them. Hoping to talk to somebody and get that out for you on Friday, a Conversations podcast. And, of course, Saturday morning, 8 a.m., not 8:30, 8 a.m. on 93.7 The Fan, the Panthers Insider Show. It's like this podcast. It's all Pitt talk, and it's on 93.7 The Fan. So you can tune into the radio from 8 a.m. to 9 a.m. We got a little hour carved out of all Pitt stuff. So hopefully you can check that out. So lots of stuff for you to tune into, lots of stuff for you to check out, lots of stuff for you to read and listen to and watch, all courtesy Panther-Lair.com. So go to the website. We hope to see you there and interact on the message boards. We hope you'll come back next Tuesday night, 8:30 p.m. for another live stream. Get in on the conversation like everybody tonight. Ryan and Dale and Josh and Nicholas and Chris and Mark. You guys all had great comments, great conversation. We appreciate it. So thanks again, you guys. Have a great rest of the week, and we will talk to you again. If not before, we will talk to you next Tuesday night.